Hi guys, welcome back to our channel, Solution. I'm sitting here with Jade again, and Jade's going to share a little bit of his story with you. So I've known Jade, I think I knew Jade before in active addiction. We weren't really friends or anything, and then I got exposed to the program and started going to meetings, and Jade was my very first sponsor. I think you were like a year clean. Yeah, and he taught me a lot, and one of the great gifts he taught me was about service and how much service him and one of his friends, word up Clint Colby, they taught me really about service. And what I did was I followed them around, and they were doing a ton of service, and service does help keep one clean. You know, it's about getting out of oneself and helping others. And that's what the 12-step program is all about. So I'm going to hand it over to you to share a little bit of your story and how you came into this recovery process.
Thanks, B. I just want to touch on that service keeps you clean bumper sticker. Like, I don't buy that at all.
Okay.
Now, I'll tell you why, because I think so. There's this thing they call the 5 pillars in recovery, which we'll touch on at a later stage. And one of those pillars is service. And those 5 pillars, I've noticed time and again, becomes like a checkbox for people. And so they engage in the service. I did this. We engaged in the process. I engaged in the service process because it was something that to some degree I felt was obligatory in my own journey, rather than giving myself over to truly what the essence of service is about. Like for example, I had a stage, Brendan mentioned I was doing a ton of service, and I was, and it resulted in a lot of resentment for me because I wasn't getting acknowledged for the service I was doing. You know, I wasn't getting the thank yous. And so that isn't really service, is it? It's a bit of a transaction, really.
Yeah, I think service needs to be selfless for it to be worthwhile. Yeah. For me, service has helped a lot because it gets me out of my own shit.
Yeah.
And helping others gets me out of my own head for a little bit.
Totally.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think there's a whole bone to chew on there
on the service for another. Just to touch a little bit on the 5 pillars, I think the 5 pillars are a very South African thing. I've never heard it mentioned in any sort of international shares, or it's a very South African thing, I feel. I haven't heard it elsewhere either. Yeah.
But I think there's value there. Anyway, moving on. So my story, I'm going to try and keep it short and concise. Obviously, like Brendan, I was involved in active addiction also for close on 3 decades, 30 years of daily use of some kind of substance in one shape, form, or another. So I was, towards the latter part of that time period, I did have, it was amphetamines. Amphetamines was a thing that became my proper hook. But the previous time period, I was one of those chameleon type addicts where it didn't really matter what the substance was, as long as it took me out of myself, where I did not have to sit with the discomfort of the feelings I want to say trying to deal with. I wasn't trying to deal with it. I was trying to avoid them because I had a lot of pain, I guess I was sitting with, a lot of confusion, a lot of misdirection, and a lot of discomfort. And the only way I knew how to kind of get by was to avoid them. And substances were what I thought was my answer to that. So so it was interesting. Like in my 20s, I dabbled with everything under the sun, and nothing really sunk its teeth into me. And because of that, I did not identify or remotely recognize that I was an addict. I had an idea of what an alcoholic or addict looked like, and I didn't quite fit that bill. So it was actually my ex-wife who first pointed out to me that I was an addict, and that was in my mid-30s. And I was so taken aback by that. I was like, "You got to be kidding me!" Because in my 30s, I had reined it in substantially. My addiction at that point revolved largely around smoking weed and drinking alcohol. And so relative to my behavior and usage in my 20s, I thought, well, I'm okay. But the fact that a day couldn't go by without having a toke or without having a drink, didn't really dawn on me that I still had a problem. And then obviously when my wife left me, largely due to not being present as an addict, that I then completely crumbled and got caught up in amphetamines and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, backpedaling a little bit. So there's this notion in the room. Brendan mentioned that in his share around what addiction looks like. What is the root cause of addiction? There's an idea in the big book, that is the AA big book, that addiction is a disease. And there are studies that pretty much confirm that idea. Me, I kind of always put that one on the back burner. To me, I was never really sure about that notion. It's not to say that I'm right and that the idea is wrong. It's just that for me, it kind of, it felt like it was almost a cop-out. It kind of felt like it meant that I didn't have to take responsibility for my behavior because I've got this disease. But I like if you break down the word disease as to dis-ease, and that I can relate to because I was definitely in a constant state of dis-ease. So what led me to addiction? My father doesn't touch alcohol or any kind of substances, so he's as clean as they come. My mother was a social drinker, but also a very straight-laced individual. So in terms of having had a genetic disposition towards addiction, I don't know that I came into the world with that. But my story is one of having grown up in a religion that kept me quite isolated from normal folk, and that left me feeling somewhat socially dysfunctional, and not really having a measure of what it entails to be a normal, regular human being. So that I identify as the key thing in my developmental years that didn't allow me or empower me with the knowledge of how to be. Then also, my family upbringing was not a happy one. There was a lot of friction and a lot of fighting that took place in our house. So it was not exactly a happy childhood. Bless my parents, though. They did the best they could. I've managed to, by and large, let go of a lot of the resentment that gravitated around that. But nevertheless, there was some trauma that came as a result of that. And then as I went into my high school years, in South Africa, we got primary school, high school. High school, you enter into typically at around the age of 12. I was 11 when I went to high school. And some news broke in our family around child molestation. And the result of that news is that my family completely splintered, and it absolutely blew me out of the water. It was also came at a time, obviously being a preteen, where that stage of development, I think to encounter that kind of news was just a very difficult, if not impossible thing to try and understand. I couldn't understand this. And so what resulted from that was a very rebellious teenage period, and whereby I questioned everything. I started to withdraw from the religious beliefs that I was taught. I started questioning and my teachers at school. I physically developed quite young, so I was able to go to nightclubs and stuff from a very young age. And so by the time I was 12, 13, I was a heavy drinker. It's not so much, I never really understood the idea of getting to a place of enough. If I had more money in my pocket, or if there was somebody else I could ask for a drink, I would have more. I would carry on going until until it got ugly. And that was the norm. And so most of my early teenage years, I had a pretty serious drinking problem, albeit that, the problem with alcohol is it's so normalized.
Especially in this country.
Yeah, so it's kind of almost thought of, well, that's just what kids do. And it is just what kids do, but it's a massive problem. Anyway, so I was then sort of in my mid-teenage years, I was introduced to marijuana. And for a long time, I kind of had this idea, and I wasn't entirely wrong. I kind of believed that drugs saved my life, because what that substance did for me was they completely chilled me out. And so with alcohol, I was this raging, angry, full-on emo kid that loved to dress in black. Shaved head, mascara on the eyes, like that character. And then with the introduction of marijuana into my life, I became just so much more chilled. It wasn't that I wasn't angry anymore, but it just, it became my medicine. And they refer to marijuana as being the gateway drug. And I know there's so much resistance to that idea. And I'm gonna just roll with that idea for a minute, just because for me, marijuana was thrown into Class A drugs in terms of what I was taught, and it was right up there with crack, with heroin, and it was just one of those things that you just have to say no to and that you just don't touch. That was my education around drugs. And so once I had stepped over that line and experienced what marijuana had to offer me, I became curious.
What do the rest do?
Exactly. Like, why has this drug been as demonized as what it has been, when clearly it makes everything irie, right? Yeah. So in that sense, I want to say, yes, it played its part in being a gateway into harder substances. Whether that statement is wholly accurate, I don't think so. But nonetheless, that was my story. I then tried the next thing. That was awesome. I then tried the next thing. That was awesome. And on my initial experience with each and every substance I tried, it was fantastic.
Yeah, I love what you said earlier as well about that drugs being the solution, like marijuana being the solution.
Yeah.
Because that was it for me, you know what I mean? As well. And I also, for me, it became more experimental.
Yeah.
Especially after smoking a bit of weed.
Yeah.
We grew up in a town in South Africa where we were very isolated from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
We grew up in apartheid.
Yeah.
There's no...
Yeah.
And the way marijuana was completely demonized. If you smoke once, you're going to be addicted for the rest of your life. It's going to make you crazy and want to kill your parents and shit like that. And all it did was make me go to the fridge a lot more.
Pop up on the couch.
Things... I think it's important, drugs were great. We have a word here in South Africa, which is lekker, which... if drugs weren't cool and lekker and we didn't enjoy them, we wouldn't have taken them in the first place.
Yeah.
I just think it becomes, at some point, they weren't cool and it wasn't nice. And I was sitting with tears streaming down my face, just wanting to stop.
Yeah. So, I mean, that lekker, that initial experience with any drug is one of euphoria. Either puts you on this fantastic high or puts you on a little bit of a downer where you feel numb. Either way, the sensation that comes as your first experience with any drug is, well, most drugs, is that this is awesome. I mean, let's be clear, right? Abroad, they refer to drugstores. They don't call them pharmacies. So, drugs do have a measure of therapeutic value. They are medicinal up to a point.
No, most of them were developed as medicine.
And so it's a no-brainer, really, that when your first experience with these things is one that it makes you feel better, it stands to reason. It's almost logical that you're gonna want to keep having that feel better experience.
Yeah, like the dopamine hit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's something we'll talk about definitely. The addiction to chemicals, be that dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins, and how those things can actually help us in recovery. But that's another story. Anyway, so so my 20s was also in a spiritual journey, because I had walked away from what I had been taught as a child around religion and stuff. I was on a quest to find out, well, if that's not what it is, then what is it? And I definitely had the thing that you referred to about some kind of spiritual experience through drugs. And I chased that experience. But to the detriment of everything else, like thinking about what I should be doing around a career, how I should be showing up in my family life, how I should be showing up with friends, partners, all that stuff suffered as a result of my own, I'm going to call it selfish. I don't think it was meant to be selfish, but I was primarily occupied with what it is that I was searching for. And anybody and everybody else in my life took a very distant second place, And also, I mean, sure, gosh, dude, I'm sure you can relate. The situations I found myself in that time period, it's really amazing that we're still here.
I like that you touched on that, but that's part of the consequences.
I mean, driving inebriated, places that we would go to get our fix, people that we associated with, it's really quite astonishing that we're still here.
We grew up in one of the most dangerous cities in the world.
Yeah,
if you think about it.
Yeah. Anyway, I need to fast track the story a little bit. So basically, like I mentioned previously, my 20s were quite chaotic. I managed to calm it down a little bit in my 30s. Something resembling a career took off in my 30s. Got married, got divorced, and then it all turned to chaos again. Really, because I'd never addressed any of my stuff. So at the end of my 30s, in the year of 2014, I reached a point where I was financially, emotionally, spiritually, on every level, bankrupt. I was done. I did not know how to continue. And so in a space of a 2-week period, I attempted suicide 3 times. And that action was not so much one revolving around wanting to die. It was more around having no clue how to carry on and how to live anymore.
Yeah, and not being afraid of dying, but being afraid of living.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's exactly that. And so the consequence of that was I ended up in a state hospital psych ward, which is a story unto itself. But I was there for a period of a month, and it was hellish. There is nothing about that environment that is geared towards sending you in a direction of well-being. Not at all. It's a dull, dreary, sad, cold, grey painted wall, no grass, tree environment. And the weird thing is, I think I spoke to a shrink maybe not even half a dozen times in that time period, and not yet. The fact that I had been using drugs did come up, but it was never elaborated upon. It was never isolated as something that could be a key thing in why I was where I was at. So they just give you prescribed drugs.
Yes.
To try and like
Numb you.
mask
What's going on? Yeah.
So it's a real problem in that our society is not really wholly geared up towards a wellness solution. But that's a topic for another day. Anyway, so this was my introduction to. So I've got to just touch on this. I managed to convince them and myself that I was okay and that I need to be discharged. And so somewhat reluctantly, they did that. And one of the first things I did that day was go to a bottle store and get myself a 6-pack or 2 of beers. And, you know, they said the drugs, the prescription drugs I was given, like, do not use this with alcohol. That didn't apply to me.
It's like putting your foot on the accelerator and the brake at the same time.
Yeah, I mean,
the engine's going to blow.
No, totally. And that is exactly what happened. Like that week that followed my time at the psych ward became a week of utter hell. I had a group of friends that rallied around me, and they basically had to babysit me, because if I was left alone, the anxiety attacks would hit me so hard that I would convulse and have fits of like panic. And it was clear that I needed more help. And one of the solutions that was presented to me was this medicinal plant route, guided by some kind of shamanic, and that really appealed to me because
you may as well mention the name.
No, I'm not going to mention the name. I think anyone watching this should know what I'm talking about. So it appealed to me that, I mean, kind of, I laugh at it now. Let me get out of myself to figure out the problem of getting out of myself. So that solution did appeal to me. However, the condition of me going that route with plant medicine was that I had to get off the prescription meds, and I could not see myself being able to do that.
A lot of benefits to the plant medicines.
Yeah. No, you'll have to explore that because yeah, there's something to that. Anyway, so the other option that came up and was to go to a facility. It was a rehab. I had no idea what it entailed. Like really, it was an option that was presented to me where I might get some help. And so, what did I have to lose?
It's like always what you see on movies.
Well, I didn't even have that as a go-to. It was just nothing out of within my sphere of reference. I had no money to go to rehab, but I did have a motorbike. A friend of mine bought that, and so I had a great bulk sum of the money that I needed to go into treatment. I mention that because it's something we need to talk about later, is the prohibitive cost of access to help for a lot of people. We'll talk about that at some point. Anyway, so that was my introduction to the 12 steps. And I need to kind of wrap the story up, but basically from my first, that was the last time. The day I went to rehab, I stopped at every bar on the way. And little did I know that would be the last time I'd pick up a drink. And so I was introduced to the 12 step. I was introduced to the fellowship that Brendan talked about people coming to share their experience, strength and hope, their hope, faith and courage, all that jazz. And it's been 9.5 years since I picked up my last drink. There's been a ton of growth in that time period. And I think the one thing I have to just touch on is it hasn't been a linear progression of better. Like I know I speak for Brendan and myself that in our time of recovery, we both have had to navigate some pretty tough things. I think the idea of using possibly did cross your mind, maybe crossed my mind, but we didn't. We managed to get through it without resorting to substance use.
Sometimes it was really ugly.
Well, that's the other thing I just wanted to say. I haven't always shown up in my recovery years in my best behavior. I've upset people along the way. I've snubbed people that have helped me along the way, and I still definitely have some step 9 stuff to do.
I think that's important to recognize that we are human beings and we're not going to do this recovery thing perfectly.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah, progress, not perfection.
I prefer peace, not perfection.
It's not perfection. Okay, I guess that's another thing we're gonna have to explore. Anyway, this has been a bit of a lengthy share. I did not mean for it to be so long. There are a lot of things in that share, like I think we need to unpack at a later stage.
I think we will as we go along.
Yeah.
What I really loved about all the things you said is the one thing is that, like, I couldn't do this alone.
Yeah.
I needed help.
Yeah.
I needed help.
Yeah.
You can't do this alone, I feel.
Yeah.
I think anyone who tries to do it alone, if anyone is out there struggling and think they can do it alone, I think it's brave and courageous to ask for help.
Yes.
I think also your vulnerability and all the stuff you said, I appreciate, and I think our viewers will appreciate. I think we can explore on both our journeys a lot as we go along.
Yeah.
So, thanks very much.
Yeah. Thank you. I hope you found some of that useful. Perhaps you could relate to some of it, none of it, all of it. I don't know. We're going to continue exploring this journey together, Brendan and I, and you. And please do share in the comments suggestions that you may have as to topics you'd like us to explore. Thank you for watching. Do give us a like if you've enjoyed this, if you see fit. Hit the subscribe button if you want. And we will, I think, dive into the 12 steps next year.
Yeah, definitely. That's where we start. We may as well start there.
That's a good place to start. Yeah. And we hope to see you there.
See you soon.